we've been wrestling with the idea of a hidden puppet master inside our heads, this homunculus calling the shots. But here's the kicker. Even with all these fancy biological tools and insights, trying to predict exactly what someone will do next. It's like trying to predict the weather based on a single ant's behavior. We can talk about trends, group statistics, sure, but pinning down an individual, that's where the rubber meets the road, and it gets bumpy. Let's put it side by side. Think about a broken leg. Pretty straightforward, right? Bone breaks, pain happens, walking is tough. You'd bet close to $1 on that prediction. Same with lung disease making breathing hard, or liver cirrhosis messing things up. Cause and effect, pretty direct lines. Now shift gears to the brain. A brain injury causing seizures. High probability again. A genetic weakness leading to an aneurysm? Again, very likely. Huntington's gene mutation? Almost certain outcome later in life. These are biological certainties almost. But then introduce social behavior. Frontal lobe damage and odd behavior? Maybe 75% chance after a chat. But violent acts, child abuse cycles. PTSD from combat? Marriage failures linked to a specific gene variant like in voles. High IQ tied to receptor types. Depression from childhood trauma? Suddenly, the odds plummet below 50%, often way below. Why the dramatic drop? Is it less biology involved? Or is it something else entirely? The answer isn't that there's less biology, but that the type of biology involved is fundamentally different. When a bone fractures, the path from break to pain to impaired movement is relatively linear. It doesn't really care if you're tall or short, ate lunch early or late, grew up in Paris or Peoria. The physics is pretty fixed. But when we're talking about why someone behaves a certain way, oh boy, it's a tangled web. We're talking genetics, sure, but also environment, upbringing, hormones coursing through your veins right now, the cultural norms you grew up with, even things like whether you're menstruating or not. It's multifactorial. It takes a whole bunch of factors interacting in complex ways. Knowing just one gene, like the serotonin transporter, might give you a tiny sliver of predictive power, maybe 10%. Add childhood adversity, maybe 25%. Poverty, culture, hormone levels. Slowly, maybe you creep up towards 50%. But guess what? We probably haven't even discovered most of the relevant factors yet. So the amount of causation isn't less, it's just distributed across countless variables, making precise prediction incredibly difficult. This brings us back to free will. Remember Marvin Minsky's quip? Free will isn't some mystical spark, it's just internal forces I don't understand. And honestly, that feels us about right, doesn't it? Our gut feeling that we're in control, that we choose freely? Part of that comes from our deep human need to feel like agents in our own lives. But another part? Well, ignorance. We just don't know enough about those internal forces, the intricate dance of neurotransmitters, hormones, past experiences, and countless other biological and environmental threads. Even our best neuroscientists, armed with all their knowledge, can't reliably predict which person with frontal damage will become a murderer. They just can't. It's not that the brain isn't involved, it's that the equation is darn complicated. Shattered bone leads to inflammation, leads to pain, leads to limp. Simple. Neurotransmitters plus hormones plus childhood trauma plus blank plus blank plus. Well, you see where that goes. It's not a neat formula, it's a chaotic system. Now here's the exciting part. We're learning. Look at these publication trends. Search for oxytocin and trust, bam, 193 papers. And notice when most of them popped up, mostly recently. Same story for oxytocin and social behavior, transcranial magnetic stimulation and decision-making, brain and aggression. See those charts? They tell a story of scientific exploration taking off. Before the late 90s or early 2000s, these areas were relatively quiet. Then, boom, interest explodes. This isn't just academic curiosity. It represents a massive accumulation of knowledge about the biological underpinnings of things we used to think were purely psychological or social. Every new paper potentially adds another piece to that complex puzzle we talked about. And it's not just one or two areas. Look at this table. It covers topics like genes and behavior, testosterone and aggression, the amygdala and aggression, MAO and aggression, epigenetics and behavior. For many of these, especially the later ones like epigenetics, the research explosion is even more dramatic. Before the turn of the millennium, searching for epigenetics/behavior yielded basically zero results. Now look at the numbers. This shows that the forces shaping our behavior that we didn't even know existed just a few decades ago are now being intensely studied. It underscores how recent our understanding is. We're still scratching the surface of the biological machinery behind human actions. So, what do we do with Minsky's definition needing an update to internal forces I don't understand yet? Let's take a historical detour. Think about epilepsy. Today we understand it neurologically, abnormal electrical activity. But rewind a few centuries. People thought it was mental illness. Earlier still, it was blamed on infections, or even caused by sex or masturbation. Then, in 1487 came the Malleus Maleficarum. Two friars basically declared that convulsions were proof of demonic possession, a key sign of witchcraft. And guess what? This book, thanks to the printing press, spread like wildfire. The result? Hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, persecuted, tortured, burned at the stake. Imagine the conversations. She convulsed. Definitely a witch. Kids are crying. Husband looks sad. Oh well, Satan gets what Satan deserves. It took centuries for us to realize it's not her, it's her disease. We look back at that era with horror. We're only a few baby steps into understanding the biology of behavior. The gaps are huge, and smart people fill them with the idea of a conscious self, a homunculus making choices. But even the strongest believers in free will have to admit, the space for that little director is shrinking. Think about it. Less than 2 centuries ago, we barely knew the frontal cortex had anything to do with appropriate behavior. Less than 70 years since schizophrenia was understood biochemically. 50 years since dyslexia wasn't blamed on laziness but on cortical issues. 25 since epigenetics entered the behavioral scene. If you believe science will stop tomorrow, then maybe the homunculus is safe. But if you believe knowledge will keep accumulating, then you're committed to either eliminating free will evidence or squeezing that little director into ever smaller corners. Either way, future generations will likely look back at our current practices, especially those based on the idea of deserved punishment, and think, my God, the things they didn't know then, the harm they did. Okay, so if we ditch the idea of free will, what happens to the legal system? First, let's kill the myth. Does rejecting free will mean letting criminals roam free? Absolutely not. Protecting society from dangerous individuals is non-negotiable. It's like saying a car with faulty brakes should be allowed on the road. Rehabilitation is key, confinement if necessary. But here's the nearly impossible challenge: punishment. If behavior isn't freely chosen, can punishment be justified as balancing scales of justice? No, it becomes purely instrumental, a tool for rehabilitation or deterrence. The real hurdle is changing the punisher's mindset. Why do we enjoy punishing? Studies show it feels good. It fosters cooperation, yes, but it also taps into deep-seated psychological rewards. Brain scans show punishment decisions activate emotional brain regions, not just cold cognition. And actually punishing someone, dopamine reward systems light up. It's a frothy limbic state. But look at epilepsy, once punished as witchcraft, now managed with driving bans. Nobody thinks the ban is virtuous punishment. We can banish that outdated notion in criminal justice too. So, how do we deter others without relying on the idea of deserved punishment? Making prison seem horrific? Not feasible in an open society. Maybe the threat of losing freedom itself is enough? Perhaps some conventional punishment is still needed if it works. But what absolutely must go? The idea that punishment is deserved and that punishing is virtuous. This requires a massive shift in perspective, similar to the leap from blaming witches to blaming disease. We cross that chasm. The next step is applying that same insight broadly. The hope is that words like evil and soul become as irrelevant in courtrooms as they are in auto repair shops when dealing with a car with faulty brakes. We treat a dangerous car as a malfunction, not a malevolent entity. We can apply this same logic to humans, acknowledging the complexity while moving away from demonization. Now, here's the really tricky part: consistency. If we deny free will for bad actions, we have to apply it to good ones too. Talents, willpower, creativity, kindness, are these also freely chosen? Logically, it seems absurd to praise someone for picking a good pineapple and thank them for their free will, instead of explaining the role of genes, culture, and luck. It's hard. We praise the host for being a better person than we are because they found a good fruit. But the reality is likely more mechanical. Good genes for smell, cultural knowledge about pineapples, socioeconomic privilege to buy one. Living without taking personal credit may be impossible. But perhaps we can aim for benign homuncular myths. Especially when judging others harshly, let's try to ensure our stories about why they acted a certain way are helpful, not harmful. All right, let's pivot from the courtroom to the battlefield, metaphorically speaking. We've reviewed some sobering facts. Our brains naturally react negatively to outgroups, Poverty impacts brain development. Hormones like oxytocin can increase xenophobia. Empathy doesn't always translate to action. Genes can predispose towards antisocial behavior. And even peaceful animals like bonobos have conflicts. This paints a pretty grim picture, right? Makes one feel pessimistic. Yet, the core argument here is that despite these biological tendencies, there's actually reason for optimism. This final chapter aims to explore that, showing how things have gotten better, examining ways to improve further, finding inspiration in unexpected pockets of peace, and ultimately tackling the big question of war and peace through this lens. The world is astonishingly different from the not-so-distant past. Back in the early 19th century, slavery was rampant globally. Child labor was universal. No countries protected animals now. Slavery is outlawed everywhere. Child labor laws exist. Rates are down. Animal welfare regulations are common. Homicide rates have plummeted dramatically, especially in Europe. Think about things that are rarer now: forced marriages, genital mutilation, wife beating, polygamy, burning widows, persecution of minorities, beating school children or animals, colonial rule, widespread illiteracy, preventable disease deaths, capital punishment. And look at the last century's inventions: weapon bans, international courts, peacekeeping forces, anti-trafficking agreements, global aid agencies. Yes, laws aren't perfectly enforced everywhere, and progress is uneven. But the overall trajectory is undeniable improvement. Steven Pinker's book The Better Angels of Our Nature dives deep into this historical shift from brutal normalcy to relative peace. Pinker argues that organized violence isn't just a product of civilization. It's ancient, part of our evolutionary heritage stretching back to our primate ancestors. He paints a picture of ancestral life as inherently Hobbesian, nasty, brutish, and short. But hold on, this is a major point of contention. Most anthropologists and historians argue convincingly that organized warfare, as we typically understand it, largely emerged with agriculture and the rise of states. Hunter-gatherer societies, while not utopias, generally had much lower rates of lethal conflict compared to early agricultural societies. Critics suggest Pinker's data might be skewed, misclassifying some groups or cherry-picking examples. The debate hinges on when and how organized violence became a defining feature of the human condition. So, why the decline? Pinker points to two main drivers. First, Elias's civilizing process. As states took over the monopoly on violence, private feuds decreased. Commerce also played a role. Trading with someone means you want them alive, fostering self-restraint and an escalator of reasoning, expanding our circle of empathy and useness. Second, he links this to rising intelligence, the Flynn effect, and a moral Flynn effect. Better reasoning allows for better theory of mind, understanding others' perspectives, and appreciating the long-term benefits of peace. Think civil rights, women's rights, animal rights, all part of this expanding moral circle. But critics fire back. The left worries this glorifies Enlightenment values, potentially masking Western biases. The right points out religion's often overlooked role in promoting morality. And many argue it puts too much emphasis on cognition over emotion. Sociopaths can reason logically but lack empathy, and feelings like justice involve the limbic system too. It's clearly an interaction, not just one factor. Is the peace really real? Pinker's famous soundbite: "We may be living in the most peaceful era in our species' existence." Critics fire back with Eurocentrism. Western peace often means war elsewhere, colonialism, proxy wars. Recent conflicts show violence hasn't vanished. Pinker uses population correction. Killing 55 million sounds horrific, but it's less than 1% of today's population. Compared to the An Lushan Rebellion killing 36 million, about one-sixth of the world's population then, World War II is statistically less impactful per capita. But critics say this fudge factor ignores the sheer terror of losing loved ones regardless of population size. Pinker also didn't fully correct for duration. Comparing 6 years of World War II to 12 centuries of slavery or 4 centuries of genocide changes the ranking dramatically. So the verdict? Yes, things are better in terms of broader empathy and societal control over violence. But the potential devastation of violence is arguably greater now. Global reach, advanced weapons, lone wolves radicalized online. Progress, but not perfection. Okay, so how can we nudge things towards less violence? Some strategies are ancient, moving. If tensions flare between individuals or groups, moving away, whether voluntarily or forced, reduces conflict. Nomadic lifestyles inherently offer this flexibility. A study of the Hadza hunter-gatherers showed this fluidity helps highly cooperative individuals find each other and associate. Then there's trade. From village markets to international agreements, trade creates interdependence. Thomas Friedman's tongue-in-cheek Golden Arches theory suggests countries with McDonald's don't fight each other because they're too busy profiting from peace. While exceptions exist, the general idea holds war disrupts trade, and stable trade makes war less attractive. Of course, trade has downsides like protests against the WTO. But overall, long-distance trade that makes nations reliant on each other is a good deterrent. And cultural diffusion, including ideas spreading alongside goods, especially digitally, correlates with increased civil liberties and media freedom. Ideas travel with the packages. Now we have to talk about religion. It's arguably our most powerful cultural invention, a catalyst for both incredible good and terrible evil. Full disclosure, I was raised Orthodox, deeply religious, then lost faith around age 13. Since then, I focus more on religion's destructive aspects, though I admire believers and wish I could feel that certainty. Despite vast differences, world religions share commonalities, personal and communal aspects, rituals providing comfort often by creating anxiety first, and crucially, defining us versus them. Neurobiologically, religiosity involves dopamine release during prayer, theory of mind activation when improvising prayers trying to understand God's perspective, cognitive control suppression during faith healing suspending disbelief, and habit formation during rituals. It's a complex interplay of brain systems. So, are religious people nicer? It depends who they're interacting with. Within their group, the US, the evidence is quite strong. Yes, they tend to be more prosocial. More volunteering, more charitable giving, especially when public, more generosity, trust, honesty, and forgiveness in experiments. However, there are nuances. Self-reports might be inflated, social approval matters, and context is key, like being more generous on Sabbath. Why? Moralizing, punitive gods seem particularly effective. Just seeing religious cues like words like spirit or divine can boost prosociality, similar to how seeing eyes on a wall increases prosociality. Interestingly, priming people with a punitive god decreases cheating, while a forgiving god increases it. And nations with stronger beliefs in hell tend to have lower crime rates. Sticks seem to work better than carrots in the divine realm. But what about the them? Here religion often fuels the worst. History is littered with examples. Buddhist monks persecuting Rohingya Muslims, Quakers overseeing carpet bombing. Religious wars fueled by imaginary friends persist longer than secular disputes. Primes matter here too. Just walking past a church can make Christians express more negative attitudes towards non-Christians. Reading a Bible story where God sanctions revenge increases aggression in competitive games, even among non-believers. Crucially, it seems communal religiosity, being surrounded by like-minded people affirming shared identities and hatreds, is the key driver of outgroup hostility, not just private belief. Frequent mosque attendance predicts support for suicide bombers more than personal prayer frequency does. Trying to broaden the US within religions is incredibly difficult given their varying definitions of who belongs. Given religion's role in conflict, what about direct contact between groups? The basic idea is simple: get people to know each other and prejudice decreases. But it's not automatic. Bad contact, unequal treatment, ambiguous boundaries, competing symbols can worsen things. Good contact needs specific conditions: equal status, neutral setting, institutional backing, and crucially, a shared goal, especially one they succeed at. Under these conditions, sustained contact generally works, reducing prejudice through increased knowledge and empathy. Workplace interactions are particularly potent. Meta-analyses confirm this across various group differences. Programs like Seeds of Peace bring together kids from warring groups, hoping the positive experiences will ripple outwards. Do these contact programs work long-term? The immediate effects are positive: less fear, more positive views, recognizing faults in one's own group. But sadly, they often fade quickly. Participants rarely stay connected. Lasting change usually involves exceptionalism. Yeah, most X are terrible, but I met one decent one. This can make peacemongers lose credibility back home. Think about Seeds of Peace participants. No prominent peace activists have emerged from the thousands involved. So, what's the value? It's subtle. Progress isn't necessarily converting enemies, but moving from hating a group based on ancestry to irritating individuals based on mundane actions like eating the last s'more. It's about individuation, seeing people as individuals, not just members of a category. As Pamela Gobodo Madikizela showed in her work with perpetrators of apartheid, forging connections even with monsters is possible. So, wrapping up this whirlwind tour, We've seen how far we've come from blaming witches to grappling with complex biological and social forces. The journey continues, and applying these insights consistently is the challenge. Whether it's rethinking punishment, embracing progress, or using contact wisely, the goal is a more rational, humane, and ultimately effective way of navigating the complexities of human behavior. Thank you.